The helicopter blades chopped through the thin mountain air as Lieutenant Commander Marcus Ghost Rodriguez checked his equipment one final time. The Black Hawk was flying low through the Afghan mountain range, its engines straining against the altitude. Inside the cramped cabin, 5 Navy SEALs sat in focused silence, each man lost in his own pre-mission ritual. Rodriguez had been leading SEAL Team 6 operations for 8 years, but something about this mission felt different. The intelligence was thin, almost too clean. Their target was a high-value Taliban commander named Khalil Nazir, who supposedly operated from a compound deep in the Hindu Kush Mountains. The mission seemed straightforward: infiltrate, capture or eliminate the target, extract intelligence, and get out before dawn. Sergeant First Class Tommy Bulldog Harrison sat across from Rodriguez, methodically cleaning his rifle for the 3rd time. At 28, Harrison was the team's designated marksman, known for his steady hands and unshakable nerves. Next to him, Petty Officer Jake Spider-Chen was reviewing satellite images on a ruggedized tablet, his young face creased with concentration. Chen was their communications specialist and the youngest member of the team at 24. Chief Petty Officer Mike Hammer Williams occupied the corner seat, his massive frame somehow fitting into the limited space. Williams served as their demolitions expert and heavy weapons specialist. His presence alone was often enough to intimidate enemy combatants during raids. Finally, Hospital Corpsman Second Class David Doc Martinez completed the team, his medical bag secured tightly beside him, ready for whatever casualties the night might bring. The mission briefing had been conducted 12 hours earlier at Bagram Airfield. Intelligence suggested that Nazir was planning a major attack on coalition forces in the region. Intercepted communications indicated he would be meeting with other Taliban leaders at a remote compound to finalize the details. The window of opportunity was narrow, they had to strike while all the high-value targets were together. Rodriguez studied the terrain map one more time. The compound sat on a rocky plateau surrounded by steep cliffs and narrow mountain passes. There was only one viable approach route, a winding goat path that led up from the valley floor. The extraction point was designated 3 kilometers away, where the helicopter would wait in a hidden valley. 5 minutes out, the pilot's voice crackled through their headsets. The team began their final preparations. Each man carried approximately 60 pounds of gear, including weapons, ammunition, communications equipment, and survival supplies. They wore night vision goggles and carried suppressed weapons to maintain the element of surprise. The plan called for a silent insertion, followed by a rapid assault on the compound. As the helicopter descended toward the landing zone, Rodriguez felt the familiar surge of adrenaline that came before every mission. He had led dozens of similar operations, but each one carried its own unique risks and challenges. The mountains of Afghanistan were unforgiving, and the enemy knew the terrain better than any satellite image could convey. The Black Hawk touched down in a small clearing surrounded by jagged rocks and sparse vegetation. The SEALs quickly disembarked, their boots hitting the ground in perfect synchronization. Within seconds, the helicopter was airborne again, disappearing into the night sky and leaving them alone in the hostile territory. Rodriguez activated his night vision goggles and surveyed their surroundings. The mountain air was thin and cold, carrying the scent of pine and rock dust. Stars blazed overhead in the clear sky, providing minimal natural light. The silence was broken only by the distant sound of wind through the rocky peaks. "Radio check," Rodriguez whispered into his throat microphone. Each team member confirmed their communications were working properly. Chen established contact with their command center, confirming they were on schedule and proceeding with the mission. The compound was approximately 2 kilometers away, requiring a careful climb through treacherous terrain. The team began their ascent, moving in single file with Rodriguez leading the way. They followed a barely visible trail that wound between massive boulders and across narrow ledges. Each step had to be carefully placed to avoid loose rocks that could alert enemy sentries to their presence. The altitude made breathing difficult, and their heavy gear added to the physical strain. After 30 minutes of careful movement, they reached an observation point overlooking the target compound. Rodriguez used his scope to survey the area while the rest of the team took defensive positions. The compound consisted of 3 main buildings surrounded by a low stone wall. 2 guards were visible, walking patrol routes around the perimeter. Lights flickered in the windows of the largest building, suggesting their targets were inside. Harrison set up his sniper rifle and began identifying potential threats. His scope revealed additional guards positioned on the rooftops and near the main entrance. Chen monitored radio frequencies, listening for any communications that might indicate their presence had been detected. Williams prepared his breaching charges while Martinez checked their medical supplies one final time. The plan called for Harrison to eliminate the perimeter guards silently while the rest of the team moved into assault positions. Once the guards were down, they would breach the main building and capture or eliminate Nazir and his associates. The entire operation was expected to last no more than 15 minutes. Rodriguez gave the signal to begin. Harrison took careful aim at the first guard, controlling his breathing as he had been trained. The suppressed rifle made only a soft whisper as the bullet found its target. The guard dropped silently to the ground. Harrison quickly acquired the second target, eliminating him with equal precision. The team moved swiftly toward the compound wall. Williams placed small explosive charges at strategic points while the others covered potential escape routes. Everything was proceeding according to plan when Chen suddenly grabbed Rodriguez's arm. "Sir, I'm picking up multiple radio transmissions," Chen whispered urgently. "Sounds like they're coordinating movement. I think we've been compromised." Rodriguez felt his stomach tighten. Compromised missions were every special operations soldier's nightmare. The element of surprise was their greatest advantage, and, without it, they were severely outnumbered in hostile territory. He quickly assessed their options while scanning the compound for signs of increased activity. Before he could respond, the night erupted in gunfire. Muzzle flashes appeared from multiple positions around the compound as enemy fighters opened fire on their location. The SEALs immediately took cover behind the stone wall, returning fire with their suppressed weapons. The sound of bullets striking rock filled the air as both sides engaged in a fierce firefight. "This is way more than intelligence indicated," Harrison shouted over the gunfire as he engaged targets with his rifle. "I count at least 20 hostiles, maybe more." Williams lobbed a grenade over the wall, the explosion temporarily suppressing enemy fire from one position. Martinez dragged a wounded Chen behind better cover as bullet fragments peppered the area around them. Rodriguez tried to establish communication with their command center, but the radio was filled with static and interference. The situation deteriorated rapidly as more enemy fighters appeared from positions they hadn't detected during reconnaissance. The compound had been a trap, designed to lure coalition forces into an ambush. The Taliban had been expecting them, possibly for hours or even days. Rodriguez realized they were facing a reinforced enemy position with multiple escape routes blocked. The original assault plan was no longer viable. They needed to fall back and call for immediate extraction, but the enemy had positioned fighters to cut off their retreat route. The narrow mountain path that had brought them to the compound was now covered by enemy fire. "We need to move to higher ground," Rodriguez called out to his team. "That ridge line to our north. We can establish a defensive position there and call for support." The team began a fighting retreat, moving from cover to cover while engaging multiple enemy positions. Harrison provided overwatch with his sniper rifle, picking off targets that threatened their movement. Williams used his remaining grenades to create smoke screens, giving them concealment as they moved up the rocky slope. The climb to the ridge was treacherous under normal conditions, but doing it while under enemy fire made it nearly impossible. Loose rocks and steep inclines forced them to move slowly, making them vulnerable to enemy marksmen. Martinez treated Chen's wound while they moved, applying pressure to a bullet graze on his shoulder. As they reached the ridge line, Rodriguez counted his remaining ammunition and assessed their tactical situation. They had enough supplies for a sustained firefight, but they were surrounded by enemy forces that knew the terrain intimately. The nearest friendly forces were hours away, and their extraction helicopter couldn't reach them while they were under fire. The enemy fighters continued their assault, moving closer to the ridge while maintaining heavy fire. Rodriguez could see muzzle flashes from at least 6 different positions, indicating they were facing a well-coordinated force. The Taliban had prepared for this encounter, positioning fighters to create multiple fields of fire that would prevent any escape attempt. Harrison continued engaging targets with his sniper rifle, but, for every enemy fighter he eliminated, 2 more seemed to take their place. The enemy was using the darkness and their knowledge of the terrain to their advantage, appearing and disappearing like ghosts among the rocks and shadows. Rodriguez tried repeatedly to establish radio contact with their command center, but the mountainous terrain and possible enemy jamming equipment prevented any communication. They were completely isolated, facing a superior force in hostile territory with no immediate hope of rescue or reinforcement. As dawn began to break over the mountain peaks, their situation became even more desperate. Daylight would eliminate their night vision advantage while making them easier targets for enemy marksmen. The Taliban fighters were closing in from multiple directions, using the increasing light to coordinate their movements more effectively. The SEALs had established defensive positions among the rocks, but their ammunition was running low and Chen's wound was worse than initially thought. Martinez had managed to stop the bleeding, but the communications specialist needed medical attention that couldn't be provided in their current situation. Rodriguez watched as enemy fighters moved closer to their position, realizing that capture or death were becoming increasingly likely outcomes. The mission had been compromised from the beginning, suggesting intelligence leaks or enemy infiltration of their planning process. They had walked into a carefully prepared trap with no way out. Williams rigged his remaining explosive devices as improvised defensive measures, creating choke points that would slow any direct assault on their position. Harrison conserved his ammunition, taking only the most critical shots to preserve their limited supply. The team prepared for what might be their final battle, each man understanding the gravity of their situation. The sun continued to rise, casting long shadows across the rocky terrain and revealing the full extent of their predicament. Enemy fighters were positioned on 3 sides of their location, with the 4th side offering only a sheer cliff drop that would mean certain death. They were completely surrounded with no viable escape routes and no way to call for help. Rodriguez looked at his team, seeing determination mixed with the grim acceptance that came with years of dangerous missions. They had faced difficult situations before, but nothing quite like this. The enemy had prepared well, using intelligence and terrain to create an almost impossible tactical situation. As the morning light grew stronger, the sound of enemy voices could be heard calling to each other in Pashto, coordinating their final assault on the trapped American soldiers. Rodriguez checked his weapon one final time, knowing that the next few hours would determine whether his team lived or died in these remote Afghan mountains. 3 kilometers away from the surrounded SEAL team, Captain Sarah Phoenix Mitchell adjusted her sniper rifle scope and studied the mountain terrain through her high-powered binoculars. The former Marine Corps sniper had been conducting solo reconnaissance missions in the region for 6 months, tracking Taliban supply routes and gathering intelligence on enemy movements. Her unofficial call sign came from her ability to appear where least expected and disappear just as quickly. Mitchell was part of a classified program that embedded experienced snipers in remote locations to provide overwatch and intelligence support for special operations. At 32, she had completed 3 combat deployments and earned a reputation as one of the military's most skilled long-range marksmen. Her current mission was supposed to last another 2 weeks, but the sounds of intense gunfire echoing across the mountains had changed everything. She had been monitoring radio frequencies when she intercepted fragments of the SEAL team's communications before they went silent. The last transmission she heard mentioned their call sign and approximate location, followed by the unmistakable sounds of a firefight. Mitchell knew that American forces were in serious trouble somewhere in the valley below. Her observation post was located in a natural cave formation that provided excellent concealment and multiple firing positions. She had spent weeks preparing the site, storing supplies and mapping the surrounding terrain. The location offered commanding views of 3 separate valleys and most of the major movement routes through the mountains. Mitchell began systematic observation of the area where she believed the gunfire had originated. Using her spotting scope, she methodically scanned the rocky terrain, looking for any signs of friendly or enemy forces. The morning sun was creating harsh shadows that made identification difficult, but her trained eye eventually detected movement near a ridgeline approximately 2 kilometers away. Through her scope, she could see muzzle flashes from multiple positions surrounding what appeared to be a small defensive perimeter on the ridge. The firing patterns and positioning suggested that a small force was surrounded by a much larger enemy group. Based on the tactical situation and the radio transmission she had monitored, Mitchell concluded these were likely the missing SEALs. She counted at least 15 enemy positions spread across the valley floor and lower slopes, all focused on the ridge where the trapped Americans were making their stand. The Taliban fighters were using cover and concealment effectively, making precise targeting difficult even with her advanced optics. They were clearly experienced fighters who understood mountain warfare tactics. Mitchell faced a critical decision. Her orders were to maintain her observation post and avoid compromising her position unless absolutely necessary. Revealing her location to help the trapped SEALs would likely result in her own death or capture, effectively ending her intelligence-gathering mission. However, 5 American soldiers were about to be overrun and killed if she did nothing. She quickly calculated ranges and wind conditions while studying potential firing positions. The distance to most of the enemy fighters was at the extreme edge of her rifle's effective range, requiring perfect conditions and exceptional marksmanship. The mountainous terrain created unpredictable wind patterns that would affect bullet trajectory, making accurate shots extremely challenging. Mitchell had trained extensively for long-range precision shooting, regularly engaging targets at distances exceeding 1,500 meters. Her rifle was a customized .338 Lapua Magnum specifically designed for extreme-range work. She had loaded her own ammunition using carefully selected components and had zeroed the weapon for the specific atmospheric conditions of high-altitude mountain operations. Moving to her primary firing position, Mitchell began the methodical process of preparing for long-range engagement. She calculated atmospheric pressure, temperature, and humidity levels that would affect bullet flight. Wind speed and direction were estimated using natural indicators like grass movement and dust patterns. Each variable had to be precisely accounted for to achieve hits at such extreme distances. Through her scope, she could see the SEAL team's desperate situation was deteriorating rapidly. Enemy fighters were advancing on their position from multiple directions, using coordinated fire and movement tactics. The Americans appeared to be running low on ammunition based on their decreased rate of fire. She estimated they had perhaps 30 minutes before being completely overrun. Mitchell selected her first target, an enemy machine gun position that was providing the heaviest fire on the American position. The gunner was partially concealed behind a large boulder, but she could see enough of his upper torso to make the shot possible. She adjusted her scope for the estimated range of 1,850 meters and began controlling her breathing. The shot required absolute precision. At such extreme range, even the smallest error in calculation or execution would result in a complete miss. Mitchell had to account for bullet drop, wind drift, and the Coriolis effect caused by the Earth's rotation. She steadied herself against a rock formation and focused entirely on the target. Mitchell slowly squeezed the trigger, feeling the rifle recoil against her shoulder as the bullet began its 2-second flight to the target. Through her scope, she watched as the enemy machine gunner suddenly collapsed, his weapon falling silent. The other Taliban fighters immediately began looking around in confusion, unable to determine where the shot had come from. She quickly worked the bolt action and acquired her second target, another fighter who was advancing on the SEAL position with what appeared to be an RPG launcher. This shot was slightly closer at 1,700 meters, but the target was moving, requiring her to lead the shot and predict his movement. Mitchell calculated the required lead time and fired. The second bullet found its mark, eliminating the RPG threat and causing more confusion among the enemy fighters. They began taking cover and scanning the surrounding mountains, trying to locate the mysterious sniper who had suddenly entered the battle. Several fighters began firing randomly in different directions, hoping to suppress the unseen threat. From her concealed position, Mitchell continued engaging targets in order of priority. She focused on weapon crews, leaders, and fighters in positions that posed the greatest threat to the surrounded Americans. Each shot required careful calculation and precise execution, with no margin for error at such extreme ranges. The enemy fighters were becoming increasingly disorganized as their numbers decreased and their leaders were systematically eliminated. They had prepared for an assault on a trapped American unit, but had not anticipated facing a skilled sniper from an unknown location. The psychological effect of invisible, precise death was devastating their morale and tactical coordination. Mitchell observed the SEAL team beginning to take advantage of the confusion among their attackers. They were redistributing ammunition and adjusting their defensive positions to better exploit the gaps created by her accurate shooting. However, she knew her intervention was only buying them time. The enemy still had superior numbers and would eventually reorganize their assault. She continued engaging targets, working methodically through the enemy positions while conserving her ammunition for the most critical shots. Each bullet had to count at these extreme ranges, as she carried only a limited supply of the specialized ammunition required for such precision work. Missing shots would not only waste precious resources but could reveal her position to enemy observers. The mountain battlefield presented unique challenges that Mitchell had trained for but never experienced in actual combat. The thin air at high altitude affected bullet trajectory differently than at sea level. Temperature variations between sunny and shaded areas created thermal currents that could deflect bullets. Even the hardness of the rocky terrain affected how she had to position herself for stable shooting. After 40 minutes of precise shooting, Mitchell had eliminated 12 enemy fighters and disrupted their coordinated assault on the SEAL position. The remaining Taliban fighters had taken cover and were no longer advancing, but they were also not retreating. She realized they were likely calling for reinforcements or trying to locate her position for a counterattack. Through her scope, she observed the SEAL team attempting to signal in her direction. They had obviously realized someone was providing overwatch support and were trying to establish communication. However, Mitchell could not risk revealing her position by responding to their signals. Her effectiveness depended entirely on remaining undetected by the enemy forces. The situation reached a critical point when Mitchell observed a large group of enemy reinforcements approaching from the north. At least 20 additional fighters were moving toward the battle area, carrying heavy weapons including mortars and rocket-propelled grenades. If they reached the existing enemy positions, the SEAL team would be completely overwhelmed regardless of her supporting fire. Mitchell realized she needed to engage the reinforcements before they could join the main battle. However, this would require leaving her primary shooting position and moving to a location with better angles on the approaching enemy force. Moving would temporarily leave the SEAL team without overwatch support and could potentially expose her position to enemy observation. She quickly gathered her essential equipment and moved to an alternate firing position she had prepared weeks earlier. The new location offered better fields of fire toward the north but was more exposed to observation from multiple directions. Mitchell understood she was taking significant risks, but the alternative was watching 5 American soldiers die while she remained safely hidden. From her new position, Mitchell engaged the approaching reinforcements at even greater ranges, some shots exceeding 2,000 meters. These extreme distance shots required all of her skill and experience, pushing both her abilities and her equipment to their absolute limits. The bullet flight time was over 3 seconds, requiring her to predict target movement and environmental changes. Her first shot at the reinforcement column struck the lead fighter, causing the entire group to seek cover among the rocks. Mitchell continued engaging targets, forcing the reinforcements to move slowly and carefully rather than advancing rapidly to support their surrounded colleagues. Every minute of delay gave the trapped SEALs more time to survive and potentially escape. The enemy reinforcements began attempting to locate her position, firing randomly at suspected sniper locations throughout the mountains. Mitchell remained calm and focused, continuing to engage targets while bullets struck rocks around her position. She had trained for situations where she would be under fire while shooting, learning to maintain accuracy despite incoming rounds. As the morning progressed, Mitchell realized her ammunition supply was becoming critically low. She had brought enough rounds for a typical reconnaissance mission, not for an extended sniper engagement against multiple targets. Each remaining shot had to be carefully considered and precisely executed to maximize its tactical impact on the battle. The SEAL team was still holding their position, but Mitchell could see they were in desperate need of medical attention and resupply. One team member appeared to be seriously wounded, and their rate of fire had decreased significantly, indicating low ammunition levels. The tactical situation remained extremely dangerous despite her intervention. Mitchell made the difficult decision to move even closer to the battle area, positioning herself where she could provide more effective support for the trapped Americans. This would put her at much greater risk of detection and capture, but might be their only chance of survival. She began planning a route that would bring her within 800 meters of the enemy positions. The movement to her new position would require crossing open ground that was potentially observed by enemy forces. Mitchell would have to time her movement carefully, using terrain features and the chaos of battle to mask her relocation. Once in the new position, she would have much better angles on the remaining enemy fighters but would also be much more vulnerable to counterattack. As she prepared to leave her current position, Mitchell took one final shot at an enemy leader who was attempting to reorganize the assault on the SEAL position. The bullet struck its target at 1,950 meters, eliminating what appeared to be a senior Taliban commander. The death of the leader caused additional confusion among the remaining fighters, buying her precious time to relocate. Mitchell gathered her equipment and began the dangerous movement toward her final firing position. She knew this decision would likely determine whether the SEAL team survived or died in the mountains of Afghanistan. The outcome of the battle now depended on her ability to get close enough to provide decisive fire support while avoiding detection by an enemy force that was actively hunting for her. Mitchell moved through the rocky terrain like a ghost, using every piece of cover and concealment the mountains offered. Her years of training in reconnaissance and survival had taught her to move silently across any type of terrain, but the current situation tested every skill she possessed. Enemy fighters were actively searching for her while she tried to reach a position where she could save the trapped SEAL team. The route to her chosen firing position required crossing a narrow valley that was potentially observed from multiple enemy locations. Mitchell waited for the right moment when enemy attention was focused on the ridge where the SEALs were fighting for their lives. She sprinted across open ground, diving behind a boulder formation just as bullets began striking the rocks around her previous position. The enemy had spotted her movement and were now actively hunting her with coordinated search teams. Mitchell could hear voices calling out in Pashto as Taliban fighters organized themselves into hunting parties. They understood that eliminating the unknown sniper was crucial to successfully overrunning the American position. Her intervention had already cost them heavily and disrupted their carefully planned ambush. From her new position, Mitchell had clear lines of sight to most of the remaining enemy fighters. The distance had decreased to between 800 and 1,200 meters, well within the optimal range for her rifle system. However, her reduced concealment meant that each shot would potentially reveal her location to enemy observers. She would have to shoot and move constantly to avoid being pinpointed and overwhelmed. Through her scope, Mitchell observed the SEAL team's desperate situation. They had consolidated their position behind a natural rock formation, but enemy fire was keeping them pinned down. One team member was clearly wounded and being treated by another, reducing their effective fighting strength. Their ammunition situation appeared critical based on their decreased rate of fire and more selective target engagement. Mitchell identified her priority targets among the enemy fighters. Several machine gun positions were providing the heaviest fire on the American position, while other fighters were maneuvering to assault the ridge from multiple directions. She also spotted what appeared to be a mortar crew setting up their weapon approximately 1,000 meters away. The mortar posed the greatest immediate threat to the trapped SEALs. Her first shot eliminated the mortar gunner, causing the crew to scatter and abandon their weapon. The second shot struck the assistant gunner who was attempting to continue the mortar setup. Mitchell quickly worked her rifle bolt and acquired a new target, one of the machine gunners who was providing heavy suppressive fire on the SEAL position. The third shot silenced the machine gun, but also revealed her general location to enemy forces. Mitchell immediately began moving to a new firing position as bullets started impacting around her location. She crawled rapidly through a narrow crevice between rocks, dragging her rifle and essential equipment while enemy fighters converged on her previous position. From her new location, Mitchell continued engaging targets while enemy search teams attempted to locate her. The rocky terrain provided excellent concealment but also limited her movement options. She had to balance the need to remain hidden with the requirement to maintain effective fire support for the surrounded Americans. Every shot was a calculated risk that could either save lives or reveal her position to enemy hunters. The battle had become a deadly game of cat and mouse, with Mitchell serving as both predator and prey. She would engage enemy targets, immediately relocate, and then engage again from a different position. The constant movement was exhausting in the thin mountain air, but it was the only way to avoid being pinpointed by the increasingly desperate Taliban fighters. Mitchell observed that her accurate fire was having a significant psychological effect on the enemy forces. The Taliban fighters were becoming increasingly cautious in their movements, no longer advancing boldly on the SEAL position. They were beginning to understand they faced a highly skilled marksman who could strike accurately from extreme ranges and unknown positions. However, the enemy was also adapting to her tactics. Mitchell noticed they were beginning to coordinate their movements better, using covering fire and concealment to limit her targeting opportunities. Several fighters were now dedicated solely to searching for her position while others maintained pressure on the trap seals. The enemy was learning to fight a two-front battle. The situation became more complex when Mitchell detected additional enemy reinforcements approaching from the east. A convoy of vehicles was winding through the mountain roads, carrying what appeared to be a significant number of fighters and heavy weapons. If these reinforcements reached the battle area, both she and the SEAL team would be completely overwhelmed by superior numbers and firepower. Mitchell realized she had to make a critical decision. She could continue providing close support for the trap seals, or she could attempt to delay the incoming reinforcements. She couldn't effectively do both from her current position. The choice would determine not only her own survival but also the fate of 5 American soldiers who were depending on her intervention. She decided to prioritize the immediate threat to the SEAL team while monitoring the approaching reinforcements. Mitchell continued engaging enemy fighters who were pressing their attack on the ridge position. Her accurate fire was preventing the enemy from overrunning the Americans, but she knew it was only a matter of time before her ammunition ran out or her position was compromised. Through her scope, Mitchell observed one of the SEALs attempting to signal toward her general area. The soldier was using hand signals that indicated they were critically low on ammunition and had wounded personnel requiring immediate medical attention. The message was clear: they needed extraction or reinforcement within the next hour or they would be overwhelmed. Mitchell understood that her intervention, while helpful, was not enough to resolve the tactical situation. The SEAL team needed a way to escape their position and reach an extraction point. However, enemy fighters controlled all the obvious escape routes, and the wounded team member would slow any movement significantly. A fighting withdrawal under these conditions would likely result in casualties. She began studying the terrain for potential escape routes that might not be obvious to the enemy forces. Mitchell's weeks of reconnaissance in the area had given her detailed knowledge of the mountain geography that could prove crucial. There was a narrow canyon system approximately 500 meters north of the SEAL position that might provide concealed movement to a better location. The canyon route was dangerous and would require the team to cross open ground while under fire, but it might be their only option. Mitchell realized she would need to provide precise covering fire to suppress enemy positions during any escape attempt. This would require her to reveal her position and engage multiple targets rapidly, essentially sacrificing her concealment for the Americans' survival. Mitchell made her decision. She would provide covering fire for the SEAL team's escape attempt, even if it meant compromising her own position and survival. Using her knowledge of the terrain, she identified firing positions that would allow her to cover the escape route while engaging the most dangerous enemy positions. The plan was desperate, but it offered the only realistic chance for the Americans to survive. She began positioning herself for what would likely be her final stand in the mountains. Mitchell moved to a location that offered excellent fields of fire but minimal concealment or escape routes. Once she began the covering fire sequence, enemy forces would quickly identify her position and converge on her location. She understood the risks but was determined to give the SEAL team their chance to escape. Before beginning the escape sequence, Mitchell took careful inventory of her remaining ammunition. She had approximately 30 rounds left for her primary rifle, plus a sidearm with limited ammunition. Each shot would have to be perfectly placed to maximize the tactical effect and provide the SEALs with the covering fire they needed to reach safety. Mitchell also considered her own escape options after providing covering fire for the Americans. The terrain offered few viable routes, and enemy forces would be actively hunting her once her position was revealed. Her best chance would be to create maximum chaos among the enemy ranks, then disappear into the canyon system before they could organize an effective pursuit. The incoming enemy reinforcements were now visible in the distance, approximately 10 minutes away from joining the battle. Mitchell realized this was the last opportunity for any escape attempt. Once the reinforcements arrived, the tactical situation would become impossible for both her and the trapped SEAL team. The next few minutes would determine whether any Americans survived the mountain ambush. Mitchell began her final preparations for what she knew would be the most challenging shooting sequence of her career. She would need to engage multiple targets rapidly while providing covering fire for moving friendlies. The shots would have to be accurate despite time pressure and incoming enemy fire. Her training and experience would be tested to their absolute limits. She established communication with the SEAL team using simple light signals, indicating her readiness to provide covering fire for their escape attempt. Mitchell could see the team leader acknowledge her signal and begin preparing his men for movement. The wounded team member was being prepared for transport while others redistributed their remaining ammunition for the escape attempt. Mitchell took a deep breath and settled into her final firing position. Through her scope, she identified the enemy positions that posed the greatest threat to the escaping Americans. Each target was carefully prioritized based on their fields of fire and proximity to the planned escape route. She would have one opportunity to execute this perfectly, and failure would mean death for all the Americans in the mountains. The SEAL team began their desperate escape attempt, moving rapidly from their defensive position toward the canyon system. Mitchell immediately opened fire on the priority enemy positions, her rifle barking repeatedly as she engaged target after target with deadly precision. Enemy fighters began dropping as her bullets found their marks, temporarily disrupting their coordinated fire on the moving Americans. The covering fire was working, but enemy forces were quickly identifying Mitchell's position and beginning to concentrate their fire on her location. Bullets began striking the rocks around her as she continued engaging targets, focusing entirely on providing the SEALs with the suppressive fire they needed to reach safety. She could feel the situation spiraling toward its deadly conclusion as enemy forces closed in on her position. Mitchell knew she was running out of time and ammunition. The SEAL team was halfway to the canyon system, but enemy reinforcements were arriving and beginning to coordinate a massive assault on her position. She had perhaps 2 minutes before being completely overwhelmed by superior numbers and firepower. The final phase of the mountain battle was about to begin, and Mitchell prepared herself for whatever came next. The SEAL team reached the canyon entrance just as enemy reinforcements began pouring into the battle area. Mitchell continued her covering fire, burning through her remaining ammunition while engaging the most dangerous targets. Her rifle barrel was becoming dangerously hot from the rapid fire sequence, but she maintained her accuracy despite the challenging conditions. Lieutenant Commander Rodriguez looked back toward the ridge where the unknown sniper was single-handedly holding off dozens of enemy fighters. The mysterious marksman had saved their lives, but was now clearly trapped and about to be overwhelmed. Rodriguez made a command decision that went against standard operating procedures but aligned with the SEAL code of never leaving anyone behind. Harrison, Shen, get Doc and the wounded to the extraction point, Rodriguez ordered as they reached temporary cover in the canyon. Williams, you're with me. We're going back for that sniper. Harrison started to protest, knowing that splitting their already depleted force was tactically unsound. However, he understood his commander's reasoning. The unknown sniper had risked everything to save them, and leaving that person to die was unthinkable. The SEAL team had survived because of that intervention, and they owed a debt that could only be repaid through action. Rodriguez and Williams began moving back toward the battle area, carrying what little ammunition they had remaining. They could hear the intensive firefight continuing as Mitchell held off increasingly desperate enemy assaults on her position. The sound of gunfire was becoming more sporadic, suggesting the sniper was running low on ammunition or being overwhelmed by superior numbers. Mitchell was down to her last magazine when she observed 2 figures moving toward her position from the canyon. Through her scope, she recognized American equipment and realized the SEAL team was attempting a rescue mission. The knowledge that someone was coming for her provided a surge of determination, but also increased her concern about additional American casualties. She continued engaging targets with single, precisely placed shots, conserving her remaining ammunition while preventing enemy forces from organizing an effective assault. Mitchell could see Taliban fighters maneuvering to surround her position, but her accurate fire was forcing them to move slowly and carefully. Every bullet she fired bought precious time for the approaching rescue attempt. Rodriguez and Williams worked their way through the rocky terrain, using the chaos of the battle to mask their movement. They could see the sniper's position under heavy fire from multiple directions, with enemy fighters closing in from 3 sides. The tactical situation was desperate, but both SEALs were determined to reach the unknown marksman who had saved their team. Williams identified several enemy positions that were threatening the sniper and began engaging them with his remaining ammunition. His fire from an unexpected direction caused confusion among the Taliban fighters, who suddenly realized they were facing threats from multiple locations. Rodriguez used the distraction to move closer to the sniper's position, preparing to coordinate an escape attempt. Mitchell was surprised when American voices called out from nearby rocks, identifying themselves as friendly forces. She had expected the SEAL team to continue their escape, not return for a rescue mission that put them all at greater risk. However, she was grateful for the support as her ammunition situation had become critical. She was down to her last few rounds and would soon be forced to fight with her sidearm. "We're here to get you out," Rodriguez called across the rocky terrain. "Can you move to our position?" Mitchell assessed her situation rapidly. Enemy forces were converging on her location from multiple directions, and she had perhaps 60 seconds before being overrun. The distance to the SEAL position was approximately 50 meters across open ground that was covered by enemy fire. Moving would be extremely dangerous, but staying meant certain death or capture. Covering fire in 10 seconds, Mitchell called back, preparing to make her desperate sprint to safety. Rodriguez and Williams readied themselves to provide suppressive fire while Mitchell made her move. They had limited ammunition remaining, but enough for a short, intensive fire sequence that might suppress enemy positions long enough for the sniper to reach safety. The timing would have to be perfect to avoid friendly fire while providing effective cover. Mitchell fired her last 3 rifle rounds at the most dangerous enemy positions, then abandoned her sniper rifle and began her sprint toward the SEAL team. She carried only her sidearm and essential equipment, moving as fast as possible across the rocky terrain while bullets struck the ground around her. Rodriguez and Williams opened fire simultaneously, their combined suppressive fire forcing enemy fighters to take cover. The sprint felt like hours but lasted only seconds. Mitchell ducked behind the rocks where Rodriguez and Williams had taken position, rolling to absorb the impact and immediately preparing to continue the fight with her sidearm. She had successfully escaped the trap, but all 3 Americans were now in a precarious position with limited ammunition and heavy enemy pressure. "Thanks for coming back," Mitchell said breathlessly as she assessed their tactical situation. "I'm Captain Sarah Mitchell, and we need to get out of here immediately. I know these mountains well enough to get us to your extraction point." Rodriguez was surprised to discover their mysterious savior was a female officer, but her obvious competence and knowledge of the terrain made their escape more feasible. They quickly coordinated their remaining resources and planned their route to the extraction point where the rest of the SEAL team was waiting. The enemy was reorganizing rapidly, and they had perhaps 10 minutes before facing another coordinated assault. Mitchell led the way through terrain features she had studied during weeks of reconnaissance. She knew every rock formation and hidden path in the area, using her detailed knowledge to keep them ahead of their pursuers. The 3 soldiers moved rapidly through narrow passages and across steep slopes that would be difficult for larger enemy forces to follow. Behind them, the sound of pursuing Taliban fighters echoed through the mountains. The enemy was determined to prevent any Americans from escaping, understanding that successful escape would mean their carefully planned ambush had ultimately failed. They were using their knowledge of the terrain to predict possible escape routes and position blocking forces accordingly. The pursuit became a deadly race against time through some of Afghanistan's most challenging terrain. Mitchell's intimate knowledge of the area proved crucial as she led them through passages that avoided the most obvious routes where enemy forces would establish blocking positions. Rodriguez and Williams followed closely, their respect for the female sniper growing with each obstacle she successfully navigated. After 40 minutes of intense movement through the mountains, they reached the extraction point where the rest of the SEAL team was waiting. Chen had established radio contact with their command center, and extraction helicopters were already en route to their location. Doc Martinez had treated the wounded team member and prepared him for transport during the medical evacuation. Harrison provided overwatch security while the team prepared for helicopter extraction. The sounds of pursuit were getting closer, but the extraction birds were less than 15 minutes away. Mitchell used her radio to coordinate with the helicopter pilots, providing detailed information about landing zone conditions and enemy locations that would affect the extraction sequence. The extraction helicopters appeared over the mountain ridge just as enemy forces reached visual range of their position. The lead pilot immediately identified the tactical situation and began coordinating with Apache gunship escorts to provide covering fire during the extraction sequence. Mitchell's detailed intelligence about enemy positions proved invaluable for the helicopter crews. The first helicopter touched down in the narrow valley while Apache gunships provided suppressive fire on enemy positions. The wounded SEAL was loaded first, followed by the rest of the team and their equipment. Mitchell was the last person to board, continuing to coordinate with the Apache crews until the helicopter was airborne and clear of the immediate threat area. As they flew away from the mountains, Rodriguez looked at Mitchell with obvious respect and gratitude. The female sniper had risked everything to save his team, then provided the knowledge and leadership necessary for their successful escape. Her intervention had turned a potential catastrophe into a successful rescue mission. "How did you know we were in trouble?" Rodriguez asked over the helicopter's intercom system. Mitchell explained her reconnaissance mission and how she had monitored their radio communications before they went silent. She described the decision to abandon her safe position and intervene in a firefight that wasn't part of her original mission. Her choice to help had saved 5 American lives while compromising months of careful intelligence work. The helicopter flight back to Bagram Airfield gave everyone time to process what had happened. The SEAL team had walked into a carefully planned trap but survived because of unexpected intervention from a sniper they never knew existed. Mitchell had abandoned her covert mission to save soldiers she had never met, demonstrating the loyalty and courage that defined American Special Operations Forces. During the debrief at Bagram, intelligence officers were fascinated by Mitchell's detailed knowledge of enemy positions and tactics. Her weeks of observation had provided valuable insights into Taliban operations in the region. The failed ambush had revealed important information about enemy capabilities and intelligence networks that would influence future operations. The investigation into how the SEAL mission had been compromised revealed serious security breaches in the intelligence preparation process. Enemy forces had clearly known about the operation in advance, suggesting infiltration or communication interception. Mitchell's intervention had prevented a catastrophic loss of special operations personnel and exposed critical vulnerabilities in operational security. Rodriguez recommended Mitchell for recognition of her extraordinary actions during the mountain battle. Her willingness to abandon safety and risk everything for unknown American soldiers embodied the highest traditions of military service. The female sniper had demonstrated courage, skill, and leadership under the most challenging conditions imaginable. Mitchell returned to her reconnaissance duties after a brief period of rest and re-equipment. Her cover had been blown in the mountain region, requiring relocation to a new area of operations. However, her detailed intelligence reports and combat experience made her even more valuable for future missions. The mountain battle had proven her abilities under extreme conditions. The SEAL team recovered from their ordeal and returned to operational status within 2 weeks. They carried with them a deep respect for the female sniper who had appeared from nowhere to save their lives. The experience had reinforced their understanding that American forces in Afghanistan depended on each other for survival, regardless of branch of service or mission assignment. Chen's shoulder wound healed completely, allowing him to return to full duty with the team. Doc Martinez was commended for his medical work under fire, keeping the wounded team member stable during the escape and extraction sequence. Williams and Harrison both received recognition for their role in the rescue mission that brought Mitchell to safety. The mountain battle became a classified legend within special operations circles, demonstrating how individual courage and skill could overcome seemingly impossible odds. Mitchell's intervention had saved lives and provided valuable lessons about the importance of mutual support among American forces operating in hostile territory. Years later, when other special operations forces faced similar desperate situations in remote locations around the world, they would remember the story of the female sniper who appeared from nowhere to save a surrounded SEAL team. Her example inspired others to take extraordinary risks to help fellow Americans in danger, perpetuating the tradition of never leaving anyone behind. The bonds formed during the desperate mountain battle lasted long after the war ended. Rodriguez and his team maintained contact with Mitchell throughout their military careers, understanding that they owed their lives to her courage and skill. The experience had proven that heroism could emerge from unexpected places when American lives were at stake. Mitchell continued her military service for several more years before transitioning to civilian life, but she never forgot the mountain battle where split-second decisions had determined life and death for 6 American soldiers. The experience had validated her training and demonstrated the critical importance of skilled marksmen in modern warfare. The official records of the mission remained classified for years, but the lessons learned influenced training and operational procedures throughout the special operations community. The mountain battle had demonstrated both the vulnerabilities and the resilience of American forces operating in hostile territory, providing valuable insights for future operations in similar environments.